Continue with our Theology of the Body Mondays. And at this point, we have covered all the basics of the theology of the body, kind of like a foundation of what theology of the body entails, right? The body is good. We have stamped into our very own bodies this reality that we're made for union, we're made for another, we're made for intimacy. And this is, of course, beyond the physical. We're made for friendship. We're made for marriage, and there's the physical component as well. And ultimately, all this points us to the fact that we're made for intimacy with God, because nothing else of these other things, even really deep friendships or a really good marriage, is going to fully satisfy the longing of our hearts. Ultimately, we're made for heaven. Linked to all this, we talked about how sexual desire in itself is a good thing. It's linked to this reality of us being married for union. We talked about a personalistic norm, how if a person should be treated in a particular way, a person should never be used, but we should be treated with love. And love being, of course, more than just an attraction, but desiring the good of the other. We also talked about chastity and how chastity is a virtue that allows us to use our sexual desire precisely to love, right? In accord with the personalistic norm, as opposed to lust, which leads us to use our sexual desires for the sake of taking and using. Now, all this foundation that we've kind of laid, again, is based on love, and it has many repercussions in how a person ought to live their sexuality. So it has repercussions in things like, let's say, premarital sex, right? Is this really a loving thing to engage in? Or pornography, or the use of contraception, or engaging in homosexual acts, or in masturbation. It has an impact also on our understanding of transgenderism, right? Because of our bodies and our sexuality is super linked to theology of the body. Or it also kind of has a repercussion on how should I live a sexual life, even within marriage. Is anything just permitted even in marriage because you're married, or is there things that are just not in accord with love and the personalistic norm, etc., right? It's a lot of repercussions. So now, in the context of this series, we're going to be beginning like a little bit of a shift in beginning to see how this foundation we've laid begins to have an impact in some of these concrete things. Now, as we make this shift, I kind of want to take a pause and talk about a couple other things that are not about theology of the body, but that can have an impact in what we're going to be talking about. It has to do with our worldview, our understanding of reality as a whole. That's important we kind of talk about because there's different kinds of thoughts in our culture that affect us, and it's important that we talk about them. So the first thing I want to talk about is the concept of truth. I want to talk about the concept of truth. So how do we know that something is true? So for example, if I say to you, I have two hands. Okay, cool. Well, how do you know if I do indeed have two hands, if I'm telling you the truth? Well, because you can see it, you can verify it. Here it is, I have two hands, right? If I say to you, hey, actually, no, I have 6 hands, would you believe me? No, you would not, because evidence shows otherwise, right? So truth is linked to evidence. We know that something is true due to evidence, things that we can see or grasp. Now, can something be true, and then the contrary of that be true as well? So say, I tell you, I was born in Mexico, which I was born in Mexico, so I was born in Mexico, and then you hear me telling somebody else, oh, no, I was not born in Mexico. Can both of those statements be true? You probably think, whoa, that's weird, Father saying he was not born in Mexico. He just told me he was born in Mexico, right? You probably think, either I misunderstood or Father's kind of lying, right? Two things cannot be true and not true at the same time, right? I can't say I was born in 1992 and not born in 1992, and both of those statements, if I'm meaning the same way, means be true, right? Something can't be true and not true at the same time in the same respect, right? It's just a principle of non-contradiction. It's kind of basic logic. And so I want us to keep this in mind, right? And I'm going to continue to unpack a couple other things regarding truth. So, who gets to decide whether something is true or whether something isn't true? Who gets to decide what is true? Well, no one gets to decide what is true. Well, Enrique doesn't get to decide. You don't get to decide. Whoever else you know doesn't get to decide. Reality is outside of us. Truth exists outside of us. Who gets to decide whether or not it's gonna be harmful for you to jump off a 40-story building? Like, oh, I'm gonna decide that it's not gonna hurt me, and then I jump, and is my decision gonna have any impact? No, it's not. Bearing a miracle or something that, like me having a parachute, I'm gonna get really hurt. And I don't get to decide whether I get hurt or not because reality is outside of us. Gravity exists outside of me. And jumping off a building means gravity is going to take hold of me and I'm going to accelerate at 9.81, whatever the number is, right? And it's going to hurt me, right? Reality is outside of us. And so what we do is that we discover truth, right? Reality is outside of us, truth is outside of us, and we get to discover it. Just like, you don't decide how many hands I hand, or me neither. I just have two hands. It's just the fact. When we discover it, same with scientists, they don't, decide things, right? Otherwise, they would just make stuff up all the time, right? It takes time for this to discover truth. They have to investigate and they discover how is it that reality is made. They find facts. Now, they can find wrong things and arrive at wrong conclusions, and their evidence can lead them to make wrong conclusions, but it's still, they're looking to reality outside of themselves, trying to discover that which is true. And so there's more to say about this, but I'm going to continue a little bit to expound this next time too, on the reality of truth. And then you'll see why it begins to connect to kind of the different things we're going to be talking about in the next couple of weeks.